Welcome, comrades. Today we talk about glorious Soviet Union and the Cold War. Alright, sorry, I can't do that anymore. Today we're actually going to talk, actually you should hear how I do it in my actual Cold War class. Today we're going to talk about the Cold War, or at least I've got here 45 to 53, but actually we're going to go all the way to the Cuban Missile Crisis. I usually break this up into two lectures for time constraints. I'm smushing it into one. But we're going to talk about the formation of the Cold War, the beginning, the origins, and why it was so scary. And I teach a full class on this. I just taught one this past spring. Hopefully I get to teach it again. It's a really great class, and we go really in depth. So this is just going to be kind of just a taste. But one of the really cool things about the Cold War is, other than the fact, yay, threat of nuclear annihilation, was we have a lot of images, we have a lot of video from it, we have just a lot of the stuff put out, which is why there's two videos that I'm going to be putting on D12, and one of them you're going to need to watch to answer the essay question for this. It's called Duck and Cover. Do me a favor, if watch the video no matter what, because at the time it was real stuff. Now it's the funniest thing you're ever going to see. Because what it is, it's a film that would be shown to students in high schools and grade schools, telling them what to do in case there was ever an atomic bomb. And what they told kids to do was if they ever saw a bright flash, to duck and cover. Just hit the ground, cover the back of your head, and that was going to protect you from the nuclear bomb. And by the end, it almost becomes satirical because they tell them, if you're in the school bus, duck and cover and you'll be safe. So the first half of the film tells you how bad nuclear bombs are, how they destroy everything, but then if you just dive into the aisle of a school bus, you're going to be fine. And it's funny today, but if we look at that more critically, we're going to see that the issue is people in the Cold War truly believed that a hot war was inevitable. 1945, you have the two biggest armies the world has ever seen. The Allies, or the Western Allies, their armies, right up against the border with, the Soviet Union, which, is an army big enough to crush Nazi Germany. And so both are there, just facing at each other. And we see that Germany is going to be divided into various occupation zones. So we see what will eventually come the Bundesrepublik of Germany, the Federal Republic of Germany, having an American, a British, and a French occupation zone. While the German Democratic Republic, East Germany, is entirely Soviet. By the way, if a country ever has to tell you how democratic it is, here's a spoiler alert. It's not democratic. It's communist. It's like if I have to tell you how much money I make, I don't make that much money. Yay, history! But what we're going to see is that alone is not necessarily enough for conflict. But look at Berlin, the capital of Germany, right here in the middle of the Soviet occupation zone. Well, Berlin is occupied. There's East Berlin, and then there's British, American, and French zones of Berlin, which will eventually be formed into West Berlin. And so what we're going to see is because of that, you have confrontation almost from the get-go. You have the Potsdam Conference, if you remember that, where they start divvying up Eastern and Western Europe. And then the paranoia, because people have historically hated communism. Let's go all the way back to the Gilded Age. And we hate socialists, we hate anarchists, we hate Marxists. Okay? We're terrified, the Red Scare, we're terrified that the Bolsheviks, which have conquered Russia, are going to conquer the United States. Well, nobody cares about the Soviet Union pre-World War II. It's a backwards, agricultural country. But World War II causes the Soviet Union to industrialize, to build this huge, massive army, the glorious Red Army. I need a red banner back here, right? And so what we're going to see is now people are terrified. Can communism and capitalism coexist? Then you get the long telegram written by George F. Kennan. If a telegram is like this, something like Titanic hit, iceberg send, blah, 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 blah. I know, horrible joke. The long telegram, it's the guy literally did not know how to shut up. It's one of those Facebook posts that you just comment TLDR. Too long, didn't read. The small little takeaway version is Kennan says that the Soviet Union wants to dominate Eastern Europe. They want to create a sphere of influence, buffer states, that they want to create a huge communist bloc. And he says that to do so, they're going to have to expand. So because of that, the avowed policy of the United States government is encapsulated in the Truman Doctrine and containment, which we'll talk about more in a little bit. But understand these two things, the Truman Doctrine and containment, this will shape American policy from 1946 all the way through 1991, and to some extent, because of that, it creates the modern foreign policy world we live in today. Okay, the Cold War, why it's so important, beyond the fact that literally if somebody sneezed wrong, Fallout 4 would be real, which, hey, I've got a ton of bottle caps saved up. But more importantly, it makes it shapes the foreign policy world we live in. Consider this. We live in a world, ISIS, okay? The terrorist bastards who did the stuff in Paris. Okay, ISIS is an outgrowth of Syria, okay? Well, Syria, guess what? Here's the terrorism for dummies, just how all this comes about. ISIS, the stuff going on in Syria, the war in Syria. Well, Syria is a pawn in the Cold War because the Soviets want to put stuff into Syria, because what's going to happen in the Cold War is the United States and the Soviet Union are going to use various countries in a screwed up big real life game of Risk. And so it's put stuff into Syria to try to keep, exert influence in the Middle East, especially since the United States is pumping stuff into Israel. Now, why can they do that? Decolonization. Because Syria was a French colony, okay? But after World War II, the French lose their grips on the colonies, and so it, creates this power vacuum where the Soviets can manipulate it. The world we live in today, I'm trying to do hand movements and whatever, but the world we live in today of, terrorism and stuff like that, we can trace that to the Cold War. Why do you think they use AKs? Because the Soviets are pumping AKs into all of this. Why do you think the Mujahideen, the Taliban, are in Afghanistan are such great guerrilla fighters? Because we taught them how in the Soviet-Afghan War in 79 to 89. Okay? But the genesis of that stems from decolonization, which in turn stems from the colonization and domination of Europe. So what we're going to see, the origins of what we're doing today were planted back in the 1890s, okay, 1880s, 1890s, then affected by the world wars, blown out of proportion by decolonization, and then the Cold War shapes it. Consider this. What is the third world? Okay? If I describe something with the adjective third world problems, you think, well, it's poor, it's underdeveloped, crumbling roads, Stillwater, basically. But if I say, well, what's a first world problem? I really wish you guys could have been in my in-class 1103 yesterday. To demonstrate this, I literally grabbed my cell phone, stood on a chair, and reached up yelling, "I've got one bar!" That's a first world problem. We tend to think of it as economics. But in reality, the term first and third world stem from the Cold War. Because the first world was the United States and her allies, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or allies, or those people that were accepting of American aid in order to remain anti-communist. The second world was the Soviet Union and its allies and the nations that accepted its aid in order to become communist and to challenge the United States. The third world are the unaligned nations, these nations in gray. The nations that said, we don't want any part in this screwed up game of Risk, that we don't want to be communist, we don't want to be capitalist, we just want to exist. And so they don't reap the benefits of the superpowers infusing them with cash. Which is why the first world, the capitalistic world, tends to be more developed than the second, but the second, in turn, is more developed than the third. This is where it starts. And again, these things have lasting repercussions. Okay, look here in the Middle East. You can see the boundary lines. This has repercussions. We see in Africa, we're dealing with a lot of problems. There's, stuff. Here Somalia and, Ethiopia, Eritrea, where we're dealing, because pirates are a thing. Are we talking the 1960s? No. 1660s? No. Screw you, Jack Sparrow. Why? It comes about from the Cold War. And almost immediately, remember, 1945, the United States, the Soviet Union, the United States, we are allies. We're working to defeat Nazi Germany. But almost immediately, we're going to see conflict between the two nations. What we see, and I'm going to jump back here in this map, Berlin, specifically West Berlin, is in the middle of East Germany. Well, the United States, we're the top dog, so why not? We introduce a new currency to West Berlin. And it causes unequal trading aspects because now people in West Berlin are a hell of a lot richer than the people in East Berlin. Capitalists are richer than commies. Who would have thought it, right? Well, there's only one road supplying West Berlin. The Soviets enact a blockade. They cut the road, they encircle West Berlin, and they don't let food get in. They do this because they say, well, what we want you to do is give us the city. Give us control of all of West Berlin. Now, the United States, we respond by an airlift. We literally fly in, just tons and tons and tons of food and supply the city from 1948 to 1949. We have the ability to do this. We can do this. We can rebuild it. Sorry, $6 million man. Sorry, it happens. Now, the Soviets do this in part because they want to test the resolve of the Americans. Are we willing to fight? Are we willing to do this? Well, eventually they back down. But it shows that Germany, specifically Berlin, is going to be the flashpoint for the Cold War. And quite literally, all the way up to the 1980s, people are terrified of an invasion of West Berlin. So people are afraid that war is going to break out. They're afraid now because nuclear arms. I'll talk about the nuclear, with the nuclear capability, the Soviets have more tanks than anybody else. They have a bigger army. So the only way we could do it was with tactical nuclear weapons. I'll put this video up. Why? Because I hope you've got 2 minutes to kill and you just want to facepalm. In the 1940s, the United States thought it would be a good idea to build an artillery piece with a range of about 20 miles and fire a nuclear bomb out of it. Yes, we build guns that fire nuclear bombs. But here's the thing. If we fire nuclear bombs, then they're going to respond with nuclear bombs, and then it just becomes an escalation and the whole world blows up. We only have a nuclear monopoly until 1949. So now, after the Berlin airlift, everything is infused with the threat of nuclear war. Now, there is one interesting thing about the Berlin airlift. Because we wanted to show we were the good guys, a number of American pilots decided to fly low over Germany, and what they would do is get like chocolate bars, Hershey's chocolate bars, tie little toy parachutes to them, and throw them out of the plane. They're called the chocolate bombers because they're dropping chocolates to kids. Which then leads me to a question. Those of you that have been paying attention, you know where I'm going with this. You're already giggling now. If a kid, imagine like a 5-year-old fat kid, gets hit in the face with a chocolate bar dropped from an airplane and dies, does it still count as diabetes? I think it's a legitimate question, but it's same thing, different result. But, I know, bad joke. But the first time I ever told that, it just popped into my head. I didn't even realize I said it till after. Half the class stared at me like I was a monster, and the other half, they were done for the day. But we have to do something funny because now we have to confront nuclear war. And what I would honestly like you to do is pause, after we get through this slide, pause it, go watch Duck and Cover, and then come back. But at least make sure you watch Duck and Cover. Because people are terrified of nuclear weapons. The United States is lighting them off like hotcakes. There's another video I'll post. It's a time lapse. It's about 3 minutes, and somebody records every nuclear detonation in human history. How many do you want to think? I asked my in-class this. One said about 114 nuclear bombs exploded. I said no. Somebody said 1,000. I said no. The answer is 2,053, and that does not count the 2 that the North Koreans probably exploded. 2,053, the majority of them by the United States, and the majority of those in the American Southwest. Please, don't go to Nevada. Fallout New Vegas is real. There are rad scorpions out there. I'm sure of it. In case you can't tell, I'm suffering Fallout 4 withdrawals, but it's fine. Now, what we're going to see is, this is an era of scientific innovation. So now we start getting the hydrogen bomb in 1942 or 1952. Now we go from kilotons, thousands of tons, to megatons. Because literally, whereas the earlier ones were fission, you divide the atom. Here it's based on fusion. You fuse helium atoms. And to do that, to get the kind of heating necessary for superheating, you then have to, what you have to do is explode one nuclear bomb to compress and superheat another material to create fusion to create an even bigger nuclear bomb. You're literally 2 A-bombs for the price of 1. So now with that, you have the fears of West Germany. You have the fears that any war will escalate. You have the fears of intervention. Okay, we're going to talk about the Korean War. We have to say that they are North Korean bandits and that this is a police action. Now, I don't know about you. If you can't tell, I'm a huge Skyrim fan. Love killing bandits in Skyrim. I've never seen a bandit with a T-34 tank, but apparently that exists in Korea. People are terrified. So we start getting the ideas of the proxy war. Let's instead fight these small little wars, okay, where it's technically the Soviet Union fighting the United States, but we don't want to risk outright declarations of war, so we're going to fight it through the Koreas, or fight it through the Vietnamese, or fight it in the Middle East, or fight it in South America, moving pawns in this giant risk chess hybrid game. Because people are terrified, what if it goes nuclear? Now we're going to see along with this, how scary are nuclear bombs? Again, if you've watched Duck and Cover, you kind of get an idea. But to preface it, one, we don't fully understand what they're going to do. So we're going to do things like here. Have a bunch of army guys watch nuclear explosions and test what effects does it have. They're not wearing rad suits. They're not wearing, face masks. Quite literally, they're out there in their World War II battle gear. We're literally firing off nukes just to test what's going to go down. We're so scared of nuclear war, and this is again where Duck and Cover comes in, that in the 1960s, here's the thing from the Saturday Evening Post, they would put this in popular magazines, describing a hypothetical attack possible sometime in the future. This is what they said a 3,000 megaton nuclear attack would probably do. If you look at the fallout thread, literally the eastern seaboard is screwed, the south is screwed, sucks to be us in Oklahoma, quite literally move to Oregon. The Soviets don't want to waste an A-bomb in Oregon. There is nothing to blow up in Oregon, apparently. But the fact is, we're putting this out. We're saying how long it's probably going to take before you die. And then this isn't shielded. This is not, the government plans they're keeping secret. There's no credibility gap like we'll see in Vietnam. This is being put out for the American people. Blast, heat, kill 62 million. Without fallout shelter, radiation kills 46 million. 108 million people dead against a population in 1963 of 169 million people. No, 189 million people. Now I finally remember. 189 million people, and we're saying that 108 of those are going to die. People become fatalistic. Look, if you've watched Duck and Cover, I know I'm broken record, but I would show, if this were the traditional class, I would show that by now, so I'm going to make references to it. If you look, it's fatalistic. They tell you such silly things as if you duck and cover under a desk, that if things fall, it can't fall on you. Apparently the desk wasn't bought at Walmart. Or if you're outside, covering yourself with newspaper will at least protect you from a burn. Okay, because they realize there's nothing they can do. But if they tell the people that there are these little things, it might, keep public order restored. Because how else do you tell your government, wait a minute, you're deliberately pursuing a policy of containment and conflict with the Soviet Union that will result in literally 1 out of every 2 Americans being killed in a nuclear attack. You've got to do something to maintain that kind of order. You're going to have the idea of fallout shelters. This is from the 1950s. Well, despite the fact that this map from the 60s says that everyone in the panhandles are, going to die anyway, if you look at the shelters, they're concentrated, those areas around Tulsa, around, in the middle and the northeast. But look around Tulsa. Look around Oklahoma City. You see those lines? They're not putting fallout shelters there because here's the thing. Both cities, we already knew this, were targets of Soviet missiles and bombers. Both cities in a nuclear strike would be hit. And the fear was so great. I'm a child of the 80s. I remember would have been 88, 89. My dad pulls me aside. And, I'm from Skiatook, which, for those of you not from Oklahoma, Skiatook is, okay, if here's Tulsa, Skiatook's roughly right around here. Literally half of it's in Osage County, half of it's there. If you are from there, I'm sorry, you have my condolences. But he pulled me aside and said, "Now, son, we need to have the talk." Well, not that kind of talk. I'm 4 years old. It's a little too, young for that talk. But, if there ever is a nuclear war, you hear the sirens and there's no tornadoes, you duck and cover. Okay, well, that's obviously going to work well. But he said, but understand this. If Tulsa gets hit, we're going to die because we'll be too close to the blast radius. Then he shows me a picture book because they literally, in the 80s, made picture books for kids explaining this stuff. And I remember me as 4 years old going, what? Can I watch Mickey Mouse now? You're literally just told a 4-year-old that if a country he has never heard of deploys a weapon he has no idea what it is against a city he only remembers being to once, that he will literally die of this thing he is too young to understand. That is, that's what we're expecting with the Cold War. And we live under that threat and that fear, okay, from at least 1949 when the Soviets get the bomb, all the way, realistically, by 1989, it's blatantly obvious the Cold War is winding down. The Soviet Union's done in 1991. But there are war scares all the way up. Probably the closest we're going to come to nuclear war. And I feel I should say this with a 1990 map. Again, I'm saying things, winding down. But FEMA puts this map out in 1990. And if you look, Oklahoma City's screwed, Tulsa's screwed, other sites are screwed. Hey, Stillwater will be... Fallout's going to get us. But, even as I say that things are winding down, this is put out, okay? The same year. I said 88 or so, but if I'm be about 89, 90, somewhere in there, I don't remember. I mean, my biggest thing was Mickey Mouse and can I go to Toys R Us? But this is put out about the time my father is telling me that, I'm, if hit, we're dead. I mean, if you look, Skiatook is just above the red ring, and the red ring, 25% casualties, okay? Even as the Cold War is winding down, this is 1 year away from the dissolution of the Soviet Union. We're still planning for this kind of annihilation. And you want to think, well, 1990, that's 25 years ago. No. The closest we ever come to nuclear war is not the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's the second. The closest would be Able Archer 83, a huge NATO exercise in 1983. And the Soviets deployed a satellite to try, and because what they want to do is try to detect incoming missiles. The satellite glitches. The satellite says there's a huge attack in progress. The United States, the satellite said that the United States has just launched a massive attack against the Soviet Union. With Able Archer 83, they were simulating the Soviets launching nuclear weapons, so they were testing everything up until the president giving the order to fire. In doing so, the Soviets see this huge thing, they see the satellites, they are convinced that the Western Allies have just started World War III. They bring their forces to DEFCON 1, they bring it to high alert, and the order comes down from the Kremlin. Massive retaliatory strikes. It comes down to one guy, and he says no. One guy, his job is literally push the button, fire the nukes. And he refuses to do it. And he's, castigated. Do it. And he says, no, it makes no sense for the United States to attack us. And he waits. And on its next orbit, the satellite gives an all clear saying, oh no, it was just a glitch, there's no attack. Had he fired, okay, then when the Soviets fire, us on our exercise would see that we're already in a condition to fire, we fire, you can't recall the missiles, and nuclear Armageddon. 1983, 32 years ago. That's why 25 years ago, we're still hypothesizing 2 bombs for Tulsa, 1 bomb, Claremore, and 4 for Oklahoma City. Not to mention, apparently Oklahoma is deserving of so many nuclear strikes. We are gearing up for this. because the world from 1949 to 1990, with a small period between 1972 and 1977, a 5-year window called détente, the easing of relations, we wait for nuclear holocaust. And that's where you're going to see attempts like this, signs over buildings. Go to, many buildings, a lot here on campus, still carry these, this fallout shelters. Stuff designed, hopefully, not by Vault-Tec, so you might actually survive, but stuff designed to give you at least a modicum of protection from a blast. What happens after the blast, nobody can really think that far through. You're probably dead anyway, but it's hope. And along with that, another video that I'm going to post, it's just called Fallout. And what it does, it's an attempt by the government to tell you what to do if you see nuclear fallout. Not what to do if you're close enough to see the flash of the bomb, but if you're 100 miles away and you see, the mushroom cloud and whatnot moving towards you, how do you protect yourself? Where they give you such stellar advice as, here, what do I got? Find either a white plate or white paper, put it outside your door at night, let it set for 15 minutes, take it out, hold it this close to your face, and if it's dust, yes, it's fallout. So yeah, hold irradiated products here. Or things like this sexist ad of, the woman cupping herself. Things like, it's human instinct to look again at certain objects. It's human nature to overlook those which lack instinctive interest. So thanks for saying the 50s, we all have instinctive interest in boobs. But, it's basically, do you actually have an air raid warning system? This idea of trying to get people to understand, if you live in a city, does your city have a system where you would actually hear sirens before nuclear weapons? They're going to pull everything they can in the 50s, everything to try to get you to, protect yourself somehow. And because, one of the reasons is because we see technology as well as the theory. The theory governing nuclear war throughout the entire Cold War is the idea of mutually assured destruction. And the best way to save this, or to discuss what this is it's the idea, if I have nuclear weapons, okay, and you don't, I fire at you, I win the war. You have nuclear weapons and I don't, you fire at me, I win the war. If we both have nuclear weapons, if I fire at you, you fire at me, we both die. So it's not in my interest to start a nuclear war. It's not in your interest to start a nuclear war. That's the thought. If country A attacks, country B responds, everybody dies. But at the same time as they're justifying their nuclear stockpiles, people also believe that war would be inevitable. Look at, many of the films of the day. There's films such as, I can't remember, I saw Mystery Science Theater once, an army guy who witnesses a nuclear bomb. He's actually close to a nuclear bomb, but he's not Indiana Jones. He doesn't have a fridge to hide in. And so the radiation makes him grow about 200 feet tall, and he becomes Godzilla. Which, I can't help but notice it's the 50s, so apparently radiation irradiates clothes, because the clothes kept the scale. So, which then just makes me wonder, does everything grow, and that opens up a whole new set of problems? Never mind. Or ones like, probably the most depressing movie on the planet. And I don't mean the chick flicks my wife makes me watch where I, contemplate suicide, but instead it's called On the Beach. It's a Gregory Peck movie. And here's the premise of the movie. Gregory Peck is an American sub-commander of the submarines based in Australia. Okay? There has been a major world war in the 50s, early 60s. Nuclear war. Every other place but Australia has been nuked. Everybody is dead, and the prevailing winds are bringing the fallout to Australia, where the whole country will be irradiated. Quite literally, the Australians are the only people left alive on Earth. They're going to be dead inside of a month. How are they going to cope with the last month of their human existence? The movie touts such things as, do what you can until the very end, and then, hey, suicide pills for babies. It's this, quite literally, it's depressing because it's part of the culture. It's part of this, as human beings, we're saying, we think this is going to happen, so let's provide movies telling you, giving you ideas of what to do, because this is going to happen at some point. Nuclear war was seen in the 1950s as an absolute certainty. It was just something that was going to happen, that men could not stop. And in part, it's because we see that technology is increasing delivery systems. You've got Chuck Yeager, who in October 1947 breaks the sound barrier with the Bell X-1. You've got German rocketry experiments. The Germans take a V-2, fire it technically into space. It makes it about 114 miles into space. It doesn't orbit. It's not technically outer space, but it's enough that the IAU, or not IAU, but whoever is in charge of, what is and what isn't space, and screw you, Pluto, says, okay, you've crossed the mile limit. You're technically in space. We can do that. Nuclear technology or testing becomes commonplace. I hope you watch that video. Okay, and consider this. Why I want you to watch that time-lapse video. If mankind has enough nuclear bombs that we can explode 2053 in 53 years, 2051 in testing, 2 in combat. So 2051 for testing purposes. How many do we have that were never fired, that were never exploded, but just wait for the order? To coordinate all that, you've got to have lots of computers, new technology. Computers such as the Pentagon's ESDAC. This is from the late 40s. I mean, a computer would fill this entire room. I mean, I'm recording in my personal, den/office. And honestly, this would be too small to house a personal computer. Never mind a laptop. These are, just huge things that quite literally would have about 1/1000th or less the processing capacity of my iPhone. But they're so big, okay, that quite literally they could attract all sorts of, insects or stuff like that might get into the system and might burn out, transistor or something. And that actually happens in the 1940s. ESDAC shuts down because an insect got into the thing, overheated, died, and it fried a transistor. So the technician goes and removes the insect, logs it down, and says, first actual case of a bug being found in a computer. They then report, well, I debugged the computer, and that's where the term comes from. If you ever wondered why is there a bug in the program, here, because quite literally computers were so big that bugs could get in and actually screw up the computers. Other testings, things like this, the Castle Bravo test, 1954. It's a 15 megaton bomb, but they only build it to explode about 10 megatons. It explodes 5 megatons with 5 megatons greater yield. And then because they don't know what they're doing, to go test samples, when they send the team in, they don't have hazmat suits or rad suits or any of that. They just simply go in and collect the stuff. So it's rapid technological, innovation coupled with human stupidity, and that's what's governing the Cold War. And so against that, because we're worried about it, we're also worried about communism. We're worried about Soviet expansion. Again, we believe, in part because the International Comintern, said so, that for communism to work, the whole world has to be communist. If you're communist and I have a buttload of money, then you're going to want my buttload of money. Communism doesn't work. But if we're all equally poor, then there's nothing to aspire to. Everybody has to be communist. At the same time, we see some civil wars, such as in Greece. We see the Russians putting pressure on Turkey, because that's not taken from today's headlines. So out of that, we get the doctrine of containment, which containment says, and this we get in NSC 68, again, George F. Kennan, where, same guy as the Long Telegram, that says, let's keep communism where it is. Let's make sure that communism doesn't expand. Because if communism is allowed to expand to West Germany, then France will be communist. Then Britain will be communist. Then it's going to hop in a kayak, swim the Atlantic Ocean, and the United States will become communist. Keep communism where it is. Okay, this is not that much different than anti-slavery. But then we get the Truman Doctrine, which said that the United States would make it their avowed policy to give military and financial aid to countries facing communist threats from within or from without. What we mean by that is this is targeted to Greece, who is facing a civil war with one of the sides being communist and backed by the Russians. We'll give the Greek, government money and guns to put them down. Or, Turkey, which, Turkey is being pressured by Russia. Fine, we'll build up your military. We'll let you into NATO to check that Russian threat. So what we're going to see is some people want war. Most people don't, but people fear that war is inevitable because the Soviets, we believe, want to expand. We're saying that we, as the sole Western superpower, must not let them expand, and so at some point, it's got to come to a head. And we get that fairly quickly, because in 1949, China becomes communist under the leader of Mao Zedong. And we see that the North Koreans become communist because North and South Korea are partitioned after World War II. And so the North Koreans, what they're going to do is they're going to get permission from Joseph Stalin to invade South Korea and try to get reunification. Here's the thing. The communists are backing North Korea. We are backing South Korea. This is the first proxy war. They invade June the 25th, 1950. And quite literally, we're pushed back all the way to what's called the Pusan Perimeter here. It takes General Douglas MacArthur, the same MacArthur from the Philippines, the same MacArthur from the Bonus Army, to make a landing, where's my mouse pointer, over here at Incheon, and that breaks the back of the North Korean army. Now what happens is as the North Koreans retreat, we advance almost to the Yalu River. The Chinese, then fearing encroachment on there and wanting to contain us where we were, send about 250,000 volunteers, read regular army troops, who cross the border, and technically the United States and China are at war. But we never declare war. We always say that it's a police action, that it's under the auspices of the United Nations, that it's only North and South Korea fighting, the Chinese are there volunteers, and we go to extraordinary lengths to try to preserve this facade. The Soviets give the North Koreans MiG-15 jet fighters. These MiGs are Russian-made, but they're painted with North Korean symbols. They don't know how to fly them. So the Russians send their own pilots. But they can't risk us knowing that they're Russian. So what they do is they're ordered, you're not going to be shot down. If you have to crash, if you're shot down, you crash with your plane, you die. We know the Americans can monitor your radio traffic. Here are cue cards with phonetic North Korean sayings. Sounds brilliant. Until an American fighter pilot gets behind a Soviet MiG, shoots at it, and, the Soviet fighter pilot can't find his cue card to say son of a bitch in Korean. So he just exclaims it in Russian. Of course, we know they're Russians, quite literally. We're hearing them curse on the radio. But we also don't want to tip our head. Just as the Soviets don't want us to declare war on them, we don't want to reveal we know, because then we would have to declare war on them. So both sides keep it calm because we don't want the war to escalate. And so we're going to see that eventually the war will end in an armistice, but technically no peace treaty is ever signed. Even to this day, North and South Korea are still at war. We also see the Korean War reinvigorates a debate last seen way back in 1783 with the Nuremberg Conspiracy. Because Douglas MacArthur, until 1951, the supreme American commander, the guy responsible for this brilliant landing at Incheon, he wanted to expand the war. He realized that Soviet planes are flying from Chinese airfields. He advocated bombing the airfields. He advocated bombing the bridges. He even said we should use nuclear weapons. He, in many cases, defied the orders of President Truman, and Truman had him fired. And why that's important is the Cold War, many military commanders, and this is kind of the theme of the 1964 movie, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. Again, also, if you're in class, well, you should take my in-class Cold War class. Not only do we have a movie night where you watch that, you get extra credit for it. But in this movie, it's the idea that military commanders started to think that politicians were soft on communism. Politicians didn't know how to fight the war, that the military should take control. But the Korean War proved through Truman's actions that it's actually the civilians, just as it had been in 1783, when in the Nuremberg Conspiracy, Washington refused to let the Continental Army march and take over Congress. We, you and I, control the military. Generals don't, veterans don't, current military guys don't. They might belabor us. They might tell us that, oh, we don't know what they've been through. And they're absolutely right. We don't. There is no way for us to know. But it's because we are, we don't have that singular focus. That is why in our system we have and always should control the military. And that is preserved in the Korean War. Also with Korea, we also get one of the greatest TV shows in history, which one of the great things about MASH is MASH literally lasts about 4 times longer than the actual Korean War. The Korean War only runs for about 3 years. MASH runs for 11. So quite literally, the last seasons. Why are they stale? Because there's literally nothing else you can do. Now, I realize this is running a little long, but, understand, communism was considered the monolithic evil, the single biggest issue of world affairs, the single great evil that would consume the world if it wasn't fought. And so we had to fight it. If we had to go to war, that's fine. The phrase was better dead than red. If to stop the Soviets from taking Germany or taking whatever, okay, we had to risk nuclear annihilation. That was preferable to being communist. And if we have to use nuclear weapons, that's fine. If we can challenge them in space, that's fine. I really wish if I'd been we're going to get, honestly, there's only one lecture I really had to cut from this course, and I'm sad about it. I might post it anyway, but that's the space race lecture, because I'm a space geek, and I wholeheartedly agree with a former prof. As a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut, but I can't do math, so I'm a historian. And then as my own take, I wouldn't fit in a space shuttle anyway, but the space shuttle's retired and I'm still going strong. Justin 1, Space Shuttle 0. So what we're going to see is, with the 1950s culture, it became this idea of praising American exceptionalism, praising American society, denounce the Soviets, and try to find some way to differentiate the two. And one way we can see this, because how do we know the United States is better than the Soviet Union? Because we are one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, for those of you who are offended, I'm sorry. Why did I say that? Because if you're against under God being taken out of the Pledge of Allegiance, that's fine. I don't care either way. I literally don't. And why is that? Because it has nothing to do with God. Because it is not religious. The only reason we say that is it was added in 1956 by executive order of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Why? To have everybody swear that loyalty. Because no good communist, remember, communist, atheist state, no state, the idea is, you don't want to, be religious. So no good communist would dare say the phrase under God. It has nothing to do with this being a Christian nation. It has nothing to do with wars on Christmas. It has nothing to do with us loving God. It is simply an anti-communist device that 60 years later, people have twisted to support their own religious right stuff. I'm a Republican. I'm not trying to bash on Christians. But understand, the religious right, the infusion of religion in politics, is a creation of the 1970s and really doesn't take shape till the 1980s. But one nation under God derives from the 1950s, when it was an anti-communist measure. It has nothing to do with this being a Christian nation. It was just simply a way of trying to find a way to trip up communists. If somebody hesitated to say that, that's how they knew you were a communist. That's what it is. And it's because of that, because understand, we have this huge fear of domestic communists. We want, some sense of conformity. We're going to have a second Red Scare. If any of you have read or seen the movie or the play The Crucible, it's about the Salem witch trial. It's about, this idea that, if you remember, way back 1692, if I said, you're a witch, okay, you could, honestly, they would take you out, they'd stone you, burn you, see if you'd float like a church, whatever. It didn't take evidence. It didn't. All I, she turned me into a newt. That's the evidence it would take. I got better. That's all it would take. In the 1950s, all it would take was, I think you're a communist. Quite literally, if this were the 1950s, never mind we'd be doing this by telegraph. Was that an A or a B? I don't know. But what would happen, I would have to take a loyalty oath to get this job. And I would have to verify that I would not be teaching you communist doctrines. In fact, the version of American history I would be teaching you would have to basically be, yay, go America, Washington chop down the cherry tree. You guys would, if I said anything that sounded even remotely communist, you would be expected to report me to the dean and get me fired and blacklisted from academia. I would be required, if any of your term papers, okay, like say your movie papers you just turned in, if you had said something in there about redistribution of wealth or something that I could, through, beer goggles say, okay, this could be taken as communist, I could report you to the dean and have you expelled from the university. We're all watching each other. And then it ramps up because we're going to have the creation of HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee. It starts in the 30s, but it's revived by Senator Joseph McCarthy, this a-hole. And the whole point is to try to find suspected communists. And what he does is they would have a lot of people come up before Congress and testify. Are you a communist? Do you know people communists? Blah, blah, blah. The biggest phrase that McCarthy would do, I don't know what yeah is, but yeah, I'm getting tongue-tied. Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party? Never mind freedom of assembly, never mind the freedom you can do whatever you want. If you've been a member of a Communist Party, you would have to testify on television before Congress. And yes, by the early 50s, you do get television. That, in fact, what brings HUAC down. Quite literally, McCarthy would say, I have a list of names. And the list would always change. The numbers would change. But a list of names of known communists in the State Department. People were literally terrified. Because if you were brought up by this guy, or accused in public life or whatever, your life would be over. If, okay, let's say I wasn't doing this job, but somebody said I was a communist. Well, I'd be kicked out of my townhouse. I couldn't get a job. I couldn't get, I couldn't pass a background check because people, well, you might be a communist and we don't want that communism associated with us. So, sorry, we can't do it. Eventually, McCarthy starts saying that members of the Army, including senior generals, are communist. And much as with the Salem witch trials, once they accuse the governor's wife, finally people say, no, that's enough. Also, in these hearings, the Army McCarthy hearings of 1953, on television, the guy basically attacks a young lawyer, defending this guy because literally it was, well, you're a suspected communist. I'm going to say your lawyer's a suspected communist. That way nobody will believe him. And people finally said, okay, this is enough. Eventually he dies broken, battered, and an alcoholic. Retires before he dies. But why this is so important is quite literally, in the 1950s, we are gripped by a fear of communism. We're scared of nuclear war. We're scared of communists, within. We're scared of stuff like this. Despite the fact that nobody here is ducking and covering, so apparently they didn't watch the video either. It's this whole idea that people are just terrified of communism, of nuclear war. You can have bad movies. Oh, my favorite. I think I may have married a communist. Or there's another video I'll probably post up. He may be a communist. And it's a newsreel. The Army would put out that you would show on television or show before a movie in the theaters. And it was like, if you see people doing this, they might be communist. And that communist feeling will extend so bad that people are so afraid of any change. Martin Luther King will be accused of being a communist. You're going to have people protesting. Brown v. Board of Education, which we'll talk about in the next lecture. Race mixing is communism. If any of you have a significant other that's of a different ethnicity or a different race than you are a communist, according to the people of the 1950s. That is how strong we were. Or not strong, strong is the wrong word I want to say. That is how paranoid we were. And with that paranoid, that is also feeding into our foreign policy. And that foreign policy starts to trip up things that are going to have lasting repercussions. Specifically, after World War II, France wants to regain its colonies, specifically Indochina. Hey, does this place look familiar? And so what we're going to see is we are going to support France. We need, if we look here in Eastern Europe, okay, we need France to counterbalance, the big red dog. We need them to counterbalance the Soviet Union. So we help, there. And in the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, the French lose their entire army. So they give Vietnam to the United States. They say, you guys deal with it. You say you want containment. You say you want the Truman Doctrine. It's your problem. So Vietnam is divided into North and South Vietnam. And we decide to have elections in 1956. Which country do they want to reunify under? But here's the thing. Most people want to side with the nationalists or the communists. They want to side with the North. So the United States in 1956 refuses to allow those elections to happen. So Ho Chi Minh, sorry, I just belched, that's what I think of that. Ho Chi Minh, who was the guy that Wilson gave the middle finger to at Versailles, goes to the Soviet Union, gets weapons, gets aid, starts a guerrilla war. This is 1956. 8 years later, in the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, the United States officially opens its combat policy in Vietnam. This is the beginning of the Vietnam War, and it's done because we have this fervent desire to make sure that communism does not expand, no matter the repercussions. If we're willing to go to war and it involved nuclear bombs, we have no problem then ripping a Southeast Asian country all to hell and back. And I'm going to, for time, I realize it's 50 minutes, so we're going to, blow through this. But do be aware that, the Soviet Union and the United States, we're constantly challenging each other. We're always worried about Soviet expansion. So much so, because they invade places like Hungary in 1956. They create the Warsaw Pact to counterbalance the American NATO. That, as we think war is inevitable, we push for a first strike weapon. And so we get the idea, what if you take missiles? Take those things the Germans were making, those rockets, make them better, put nuclear warheads on them. Now what if we can take that and put it on a submarine? We're creating first strike weapons. The idea of what if you could take a weapon? It's twofold. If you look at the ballistic missile submarine, okay, a submarine with nuclear missiles, if you fire that at an enemy city, well, the submarine can lay off the coast. There's like 15 minutes warning. Before, the side has a chance to react, the missile hits its target. So theoretically, you could nuke somebody and then the other side would just have to surrender because they don't want to trigger MAD. On the flip side of the coin, if you hide these submarines, there are launchers that you cannot destroy. So it reinforces MAD because it ensures that country A can't take out all of country B's missiles in a sneak attack. But things just keep, escalating and escalating and escalating. And so that's going to lead to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Now, what is important about the Cuban Missile Crisis is in 1959, Cuba goes communist. We had, in the 1930s, finally given them independence, but we then propped up a dictator regime. They renounce that regime, become communist, and so the United States sponsors an invasion, the Bay of Pigs invasion, and it fails. So because Cuba is communist, they're getting support from the Soviet Union, they then obtain Soviet nuclear missiles, which, they are being installed in Cuba. Now, with these missiles, okay, you can hit New York, Washington, Chicago. You can even hit Seattle and Los Angeles, and with almost no warning. You can even drop one on Mexico City, because why the hell not? Now, the thing is, this is also American hypocrisy. We have missiles in Turkey. Okay, missiles in Turkey are just as far away from Moscow as missiles in Cuba are to Washington, D.C. But we don't see it that way. We see it as a case of this is a clear Soviet aggression. This is clear Soviet, trying to trip nuclear war. So we become paranoid. We declare a blockade of the island, but blockade is an act of war, so we call it a quarantine. We prep an invasion, and for 13 days, The world's collective sphincters go as we all wait for nuclear war. Until 1983, this is the closest both sides come to nuclear war. Now, both sides will eventually back down, but only because it gets so bad the Soviet embassy in Washington burns their documents. That, there are a number of incidents that could have almost led to war. And finally, it takes a backroom deal where the United States says, okay, look, if you guys pull your missiles out of Cuba, we'll pull ours out of Turkey, and then, we can both have the drawdown and we can both save face. It takes backroom dealing. But what this really shows is that both sides are increasingly paranoid, worried about war, and there is the question, can communism and capitalism coexist? Here's the thing. At no time does the United States want to declare war on the Soviet Union. At no time does the Soviet Union want to declare war on the United States. But both are terrified of the other. And it's in this, sphere of, just hostility that, understand the Cold War continues. I wish I could say that, hey, everybody, learned how bad it was and just stopped. But instead, it keeps escalating and escalating. And then finally, it takes to the 1970s to scale back. But we're still dealing with war scares and nuclear proliferation all the way up until the 1990s. So on that happy note, sorry it ran a little long, but we'll call it good for today. On the next lecture, we'll talk about the civil rights movement, and I hope to do one final lecture after that, and we'll at least start the problems of Vietnam, maybe space race. We'll see how it goes. But as always, if you have any questions, let me know. Start checking over D2L. I should have everything graded by the end of the week. If there's anything I can do to help you prepare for the final exam, anything of that sort, just let me know. As always, take it easy. Have a good dead week, and I will see you in the next video. There we go. Finally found the stop button. Bye-bye.